The wind howled through the granite teeth of the San Juan Mountains like a dying wolf, a sound that would have chilled a lesser man to the marrow. Eli Ward did not flinch. He knelt in the snow, his skin roughened by 35 years of sun and frost, his hands steady as he checked the trap line he had set along the ridge. It was late October, and the high country was already surrendering to winter. The air up here, 8,000 feet above the rest of the world, was thin and biting, tasting of pine needles and coming storms. Eli stood, his knees cracking in the cold silence. He was a tall man, built of lean muscle and scar tissue, with eyes the color of the slate-gray sky, eyes that had seen too much of the war between the states and too much of the solitude that followed. He adjusted the heavy buffalo coat over his shoulders, the weight of it familiar and comforting. Below him, the world fell away in a dizzying drop of timber and stone, down toward the valley floor where the town of Silver Creek sat like a smudge of soot on a white sheet. He lived alone in a cabin that clung to a shelf of rock halfway up the mountain, a structure of hewn logs and mud chinking that he had built with his own hands. It was a sturdy place, tight against the wind, but it was quiet. God, it was quiet. The silence was not the peaceful kind found in church. It was a heavy, suffocating thing that pressed against his ears at night. Years ago, his younger brother, Samuel, had filled that silence with laughter and the scrape of a fiddle. But Samuel had been taken by a blizzard 5 years back, lost in a whiteout just a mile from safety. Eli had found him when the thaw came. Since then, Eli had spoken to no one but his horse and the occasional trader. He finished his rounds, the sky darkening to the color of a bruised plum. He needed supplies. The flour barrel was scraping bottom, and he was low on coffee. The thought of descending into town soured his stomach. He hated the way the townspeople looked at him. The wild mountain man, the hermit, the tragedy. They whispered when he passed, their voices like dry leaves skittering on pavement. But a man could not eat silence, and he could not shoot coffee beans from the trees. The ride down the switchback trail the next morning was treacherous. The path was little more than a deer run, slick with black ice hidden beneath the dusting of powder. His horse, a sure-footed roan named Buster, placed his hooves with deliberate care, snorting plumes of steam into the frigid air. Eli rode with a loose rein, trusting the animal. One slip here meant a fall that would leave nothing to bury. Silver Creek was bustling with the frantic energy of a town preparing for the deep freeze. Wagons churned the mud of the main street into a thick, freezing paste. Men shouted orders to mules, and the scent of wood smoke and unwashed bodies hung heavy in the air. Eli tied Buster to the rail outside the general store and stepped inside, ducking his head to clear the door frame. The warmth of the potbelly stove hit him like a physical blow. The store smelled of sawdust, cured tobacco, and dried apples. Amos Higgins, the storekeeper, looked up from the counter, his spectacles catching the light. "Afternoon, Eli," Amos said, his voice careful. "Beating the storm?" Eli nodded once, moving to the back of the store to gather his goods. A sack of flour, 10 pounds of beans, a tin of lard, and the coffee. As he worked, the bell above the door chimed, and 2 men entered, stamping snow from their boots. Eli recognized them, miners from the Lucky Strike claim. They did not see him in the shadows of the shelves. "I am telling you, Jed," one man said, rubbing his hands together, "there is nothing like it." Coming home to a hot supper and a warm woman after a week in the drift, Mary had a roast waiting. And the little one, he is walking now, nearly knocked me over when I walked in the door. The other man laughed. "You are a lucky son of a gun. My Sarah is knitting me a new scarf. Says she worries about my chest in this damp." Eli stood frozen, his hand gripping a sack of beans until his knuckles turned white. A hot supper, a warm woman, someone to worry about his chest. The ache that bloomed in his chest was sudden and sharp, worse than any old shrapnel wound. He had convinced himself he did not need those things, that he was content with the wind and the trees, but hearing it spoken aloud, so casually, tore the lie away. He was not content. He was starving, and not for food. He approached the counter, piling his goods with a little more force than necessary. Amos tallied the bill in silence, glancing at Eli's grim face. As Eli reached into his pocket for his coin pouch, Amos cleared his throat. "You look like a man wrestling a bear." "Eli," the storekeeper said softly, "it is a long winter coming." Eli grunted, counting out $3 silver. Amos hesitated, then reached under the counter and pulled out a crumpled newspaper, weeks old. He smoothed it out on the wood. "I do not mean to pry, but I know you are up there alone since Samuel passed. It is no life for a man, looking at nothing but 4 walls for 6 months. Eli looked down. In the center of the page, circled in charcoal, was an advertisement, matrimonial agency. Gentlemen of good character sought for correspondence with ladies of refinement. Wives available for settlement in the West. Eli stared at the words. The ink was smudged, but the promise held fast. A wife, someone to share the cabin, someone to break the silence. "I am no gentleman," Eli muttered, pushing the paper away. "And I am no matchmaker," Amos replied, leaving the paper where it lay. "But a man needs an anchor, Eli, otherwise he just drifts away." Eli rode back up the mountain that evening with the supplies packed on a mule behind him. The newspaper was tucked inside his coat, against his heart. It took him 3 nights to write the letter. He sat at the rough-hewn table, the kerosene lamp casting long, dancing shadows against the logs. His hands, skilled with a skinning knife and an axe, felt clumsy and oversized holding the delicate pen. He wasted 4 sheets of precious paper, staring at the blankness, feeling foolish. Finally, he wrote the truth, or as much of it as he could bear to put down. "To whom it may concern, my name is Eli Ward. I live in the San Juan Mountains, 2 hours' ride from Silver Creek. I have a cabin and a good claim. I trap and I cut timber. I am 35 years old. I am not a man of many words, and I am not handsome to look at. But I am strong, and I keep my promises. I can offer a woman a warm house and plenty to eat. I can promise she will be safe. It is lonely up here. I need a wife who is willing to work and willing to stay. If there is a woman who wants a quiet life and a husband who will treat her right, please have her write to me. Respectfully, Eli Ward." He sealed it with a thumb of wax and wrote it down to the post office before he could change his mind. The waiting was an agony he had not expected. Weeks turned into a month. Snow began to stick to the ground, white and permanent. Then, a letter arrived. The handwriting was elegant, the loops and curves precise, written by a hand that clearly had not spent a lifetime scrubbing laundry or gripping a plow. Her name was Claire Monroe. "Dear Mr. Ward, your letter was forwarded to me by Mr. Sterling, the agent. You speak of honesty, and that is a rare commodity in this world. I appreciate it more than you know. I am 28 years old. I was raised in Boston, though circumstances have left me in St. Louis. I am educated and can keep a household account. Though I admit I have much to learn about the frontier, I have lost family, as I sense you have, and I understand the weight of loneliness. I must be plain with you, as you were with me. I am not like other women. A tragedy some years ago altered the course of my life. I am no longer the girl I was, and I carry the marks of that time, but I have a strong heart, Mr. Ward, and a desire to be of use. I want a home where I am respected, not pitied, if you can offer me that. I will come. Sincerely, Claire Monroe." Eli read the letter until the paper grew soft at the creases. She sounded serious, dignified, marks of that time. He touched the jagged scar that ran from his hairline to his jaw, hidden mostly by his beard. He understood marks. He understood being changed by tragedy. He did not care if she had scars. He did not care if she was not a beauty queen. He wanted a partner. He wrote back immediately. He did not ask for details of her tragedy. It felt rude to pry. Instead, he received a letter from the broker, Mr. Sterling, Mr. Ward. Miss Monroe is a catch, I assure you, a lady of high breeding who has fallen on hard times. She is delicate, yes, and will require a gentle hand, as she is in need of a fresh start away from the city memories. But she is healthy and eager. The fee for her transport and my services is $300. Eli emptied his savings from the tin box under the floorboards. It was nearly everything he had. Money saved from 3 seasons of prime beaver pelts. He sent it without hesitation. He began to build a picture of her in his mind, a slender woman, perhaps a bit frail from city living, but standing tall beside him on the porch, watching the sunset. He imagined her sweeping the floor, her skirts kicking up dust. He imagined her sitting by the fire, mending his torn shirts. He imagined a life 1,000 miles away, in a boarding house in St. Louis that smelled of boiled cabbage and coal dust. Claire Monroe sat in her wheelchair by the window, looking at the gray brick wall of the alleyway. The room was small, barely wide enough for the chair to turn around. Her trunk was packed in the corner. On her lap lay Eli's letter. "I can promise she will be safe. Safe." She had not felt safe in 3 years, not since the day the carriage wheel shattered, and the world turned upside down, ending in blood and the scream of tearing metal. She looked down at the blanket covering her lap, beneath the wool. Her skirts fell flat where her legs should have been. The amputation had been high, above the knee on both sides. She remembered Thomas, her fiancé. He had come to the hospital only once. He had stood in the doorway, pale and sweating, holding his hat like a shield. "I cannot do it, Claire," he had whispered. "I want a family. I want a life. You are not fit for the life we planned." He married her cousin 6 months later. Her own family had been little better. They whispered about institutions. They spoke of homes for the invalid. They looked at her with a mixture of shame and annoyance, as if her survival was an inconvenience to their social calendar. They wanted her hidden away, a secret kept in a back room. No, she would not be hidden. She would not rot in an asylum, staring at a wall until she died. She had found the advertisement in a discarded paper. She had written to Mr. Sterling, the broker. She had told him everything. She had been explicit. "I have no legs. I use a wheelchair. Mr. Sterling had visited her, his eyes counting the few pieces of jewelry she had left to sell. "I can find you a husband," he had said, his voice oily. "But we must be discreet. Men in the West are practical. If we list every ailment, they will turn the page. Let me handle the introductions. Once he meets you, once he sees your pretty face, he will be charmed." Claire had argued, but Sterling was adamant. "Do you want to go to the West, Miss Monroe? Or do you want to go to the poorhouse?" So she had let him write the letters. She had let him smooth over the truth. She told herself that this Eli Ward sounded kind. He sounded lonely, surely. A lonely man would understand that a body was just a vessel. Surely, if she worked hard, if she proved her mind and her heart were whole, he would forgive the rest. It was a desperate gamble, a terrifying one. The day she left, the boarding house landlady watched from the top of the stairs, arms crossed. "Good riddance," the woman muttered as the porter, a kind man named Jefferson, carried Claire down the front steps, her chair folded under his arm. "You all right, miss?" Jefferson asked as he settled her into the chair on the sidewalk. "I am terrified," Claire said, her voice trembling. "But I am going." The train station was a cavern of noise and steam. People stared. They always stared. They looked at the chair, then at her face, then quickly away, as if her condition was contagious. Claire kept her chin high, her hands gripping the wooden wheels. Boarding the train was a humiliation she had to endure. Since the cars were not built for her, Jefferson had to carry her aboard like a child, depositing her on the velvet seat while passengers gawked. He brought the chair on after her, stowing it in the luggage rack. "Good luck out there, miss," Jefferson said, tipping his cap before he left. The whistle screamed, a lonely, piercing sound. The train lurched forward. Claire pressed her forehead against the cold glass. Every turn of the wheel took her further from the life she had known, and closer to a man who was expecting a woman who could walk. She closed her eyes and prayed that Eli Ward was as good a man as his letters claimed. The journey took 5 days. 5 days of rattling, jarring motion that sent phantom pains shooting through the limbs she no longer had. 5 days of sitting in one spot, unable to move to the dining car, relying on the kindness of conductors to bring her water and bread. She slept sitting up, her neck cramping, her body aching. As the landscape changed from the green rolls of the Midwest to the brown, flat expanse of the plains, and finally to the jagged, imposing wall of the Rockies, Claire's fear grew. The mountains were beautiful, yes, but they were savage. They looked unforgiving. What have I done, she thought, watching a hawk circle a snow-capped peak. How can I live in a place like this? But there was no turning back. She had spent her last dime on the ticket. She had burned every bridge. Up on the mountain, Eli was a man possessed. He scrubbed the cabin floor until the wood grain shone pale and clean. He chinked the gaps in the logs with fresh mud to keep out the drafts. He repaired the second bed frame in the loft, though he hoped, eventually, they would not need 2 beds, and stuffed the mattress with fresh straw and dried lavender he had gathered in the summer. He chopped wood until his stack was a fortress wall against the cabin side. He smoked 3 deer worth of venison. He bought a bolt of calico cloth from town, draping it over the single window to make curtains, though they looked clumsy and crooked. He caught himself talking to the empty room. "I will put the shelf here," he said to the air. "She can reach the spices easily here." He pictured her tall. He pictured her with broad shoulders, capable of hauling water from the creek. He pictured a woman who could ride alongside him, who could help him drag timber when the snows got deep. He needed a partner for the work as much as for the soul. The mountains did not suffer the weak. On the morning of November 14th, the day the train was due, Eli woke before dawn. He shaved his beard for the first time in 10 years, revealing a jaw that was strong but pale compared to the rest of his weathered face. He trimmed his hair. He put on his only suit, a black wool thing that smelled of cedar chest and disuse. He saddled Buster and tied the pack mule behind. The ride down was brutal. The wind was coming out of the north, carrying ice crystals that stung like needles. The trail was worse than before. In one spot, Buster's hind leg slipped on a patch of hidden ice, sending a shower of stones rattling down the abyss. Eli jerked the reins, his heart hammering. "Steady," he soothed the horse. "Easy now." He thought of Claire riding up this trail. He would have to lead her horse carefully. She would be frightened. City-bred as she was, he would protect her. He reached the Silver Creek station an hour before the train was due. He paced the wooden platform, his boots thumping hollowly. A small crowd had gathered, townsfolk with nothing better to do than see who was coming in on the last train before the deep winter set in. Amos was there, leaning against a post. Nervous. Eli? Like a cat in a room full of rockers, Eli admitted, pulling at his stiff collar. "She will be fine," Amos said. "Just remember to smile." Then the sound came, the low rumble of iron on iron, echoing off the canyon walls. The whistle shrieked, echoing like a banshee. The ground shook. The great black engine rounded the bend, belching smoke, grinding to a halt with a screech of brakes that set Eli's teeth on edge. Steam hissed, obscuring the platform for a moment. Doors banged open. Eli stepped forward, crushing his hat in his hands. He scanned the faces. A businessman in a bowler hat, a family of 4, looking exhausted, a group of miners. He looked for a woman standing alone, a woman with a trunk. He looked for the sturdy, delicate but capable wife he had built in his mind. The platform cleared. The passengers dispersed into the arms of the waiting family or headed for the saloon. Eli's heart stopped. She hadn't come. He had been a fool. He had sent the money, and she had taken it and laughed at the mountain man's stupidity. The shame rose in his throat, hot and bitter. He turned to Amos, ready to make a joke, to deflect the pain. "Wait," Amos said, pointing. "Look, by the baggage car." The conductor and a porter were struggling with something. They were lowering a ramp. Eli squinted. The porter backed down the ramp, pulling a wooden chair with the large wheels. In the chair sat a woman. She was small, wrapped in a navy blue cloak that had seen better days. Her face was pale, framed by dark hair that had come loose from its pins. Her eyes were wide, scanning the platform with a look of terrified determination. But Eli did not look at her eyes. He looked at the heavy gray wool blanket that was tucked tightly around her waist and draped over the seat. It fell straight down. It did not drape over my knees. It did not bunch around its feet resting on footplates. The blanket ended abruptly where the seat ended. The wind whipped the corner of the blanket up for a second, revealing the empty space where legs should have been. The silence on the platform was absolute. It felt louder than the train whistle. Eli felt the blood drain from his face. He felt as if he had been struck in the gut with a sledgehammer. This was not the sturdy frontier wife he had imagined hauling water. This was not a woman who could ride a horse up an icy trail. This was a woman who could not walk. The porter turned the chair around. The woman looked up. She saw the crowd staring. She saw the shock on the faces of the men, the pity on the faces of the women. Her posture stiffened, her jaw setting in a line of defensive pride. Then, her gaze landed on Eli. She saw the tall man in the ill-fitting suit, the scar on his jaw, the crushed hat in his hands. She saw the horror in his eyes. For a heartbeat, neither of them moved. The wind tore at Eli's coat. "Eli Ward?" she said. Her voice was soft, but it carried through the cold air, clear and steady. Eli could not speak. He stood rooted to the planks. The image of his mountain cabin, with its narrow door, its high steps, its steep, rocky path, crashing into the reality of the woman sitting before him. "Eli Ward?" she asked again, and this time there was a tremor of fear beneath the calm. He took a stumbling step forward, his mind shouting one word: impossible. Eli Ward stood as still as the pine trees that lined the ridge of his mountain home. But inside, a landslide was tearing him apart. The wind whipped across the platform, biting at his exposed face. Yet he did not feel the cold. He felt only the hollow, ringing shock that had emptied his lungs of air. He looked at the woman in the wheelchair, at the dark, terrified eyes, the neat hands clutching the armrests, and the devastating flatness of the wool blanket where the rest of her should have been. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. A murmur rippled through the crowd behind him, a sound like dry leaves scraping against stone. He heard a snicker, then a hushed whisper. "Half a woman. Look at that. Did he order a cripple?" The words struck Eli like buckshot. His jaw tightened until the muscles ached. Claire Monroe watched the realization settle over him, and the small flicker of hope she had nursed across 1,000 miles of iron track was snuffed out. She saw his eyes drop to the blanket again, then back to her face, wide with a mixture of horror and confusion. She knew this look. She had seen it on her fiancé's face, on her aunt's face, in the eyes of every stranger who realized she would never stand to greet them. She gripped the wooden wheels of her chair, her knuckles turning white. She would not cry. She refused to give these strangers the satisfaction of her tears. "Mr. Ward," she said again, her voice steady despite the trembling in her chest. "I see that Mr. Sterling was less than precise in his description." Before Eli could answer, a man in a checkered suit bustled forward, wiping sweat from his forehead with a silk handkerchief despite the freezing temperature. It was Sterling, the broker, his smile bright and brittle. "Mr. Ward, a pleasure, a true pleasure," Sterling chattered, stepping between Eli and the wheelchair as if to block the view. "A bit of a chill in the air, isn't there? But here she is, safe and sound. Miss Monroe is a bit tired from the journey, naturally. Perhaps we should get her to the hotel." Eli ignored the hand Sterling offered. He looked over the little man's head, his gaze locking onto the broker's shifting eyes. "You did not tell me." Sterling's smile faltered. "I beg your pardon? You wrote she was delicate," Eli said, his voice a low rumble that vibrated in his chest. "You wrote she needed a fresh start. You did not write that she had no legs." Sterling cleared his throat, glancing nervously at the crowd that was now listening openly. "Now, Mr. Ward, let us be reasonable. Miss Monroe is a woman of education and refinement. I merely focused on her qualities of character. You wrote that you wanted a wife, a companion. You did not specify that you required a farmhand. I live on a mountain," Eli said, stepping closer, his shadow falling over the smaller man. "I live in snow 6 months of the year. I have to chop wood, haul water, and fight off wolves. I did not want a farmhand. I wanted a partner who could survive, and she can, Sterling insisted, though he took a step back. She is healthy as a horse, apart from the obvious. Look, Ward, if I had told you, would you have sent the money? Would you have agreed? No, Eli said bluntly. Exactly, Sterling said, spreading his hands as if the matter were settled. You wanted a wife, not a nurse. I simply ensured you got the chance to meet a wonderful woman you would have otherwise unfairly dismissed. I did you a favor. The word nurse hung in the air, ugly and sharp. Claire felt the heat rise in her cheeks, a burning shame that made her dizzy. She looked at Eli. He was not looking at her. He was staring at Sterling with a look of pure, cold fury. He looked like a man who was calculating exactly how much trouble it would be to throw the broker onto the tracks. I'm not a nurse, Eli ground out. And I have been cheated, the crowd muttered. Someone laughed, a harsh, barking sound. Send her back. Eli, a voice called out from the station steps. Trade her in for a mule. Eli stiffened. He looked at the townspeople. He saw the butcher, the smith, the women who had always crossed the street to avoid him. They were grinning, elbowing each other, enjoying the show. The reclusive mountain man had been made a fool of. They were drinking up his humiliation like cheap whiskey. Claire took a breath, her chest aching. She could not bear this. She could not bear to be the cause of this man's shame. Nor could she bear to sit here and be discussed like a lame horse at an auction. Mr. Ward, she said. Eli turned to her. His eyes were hard, but the anger in them was directed at the world, not entirely at her. Mr. Ward, she repeated, lifting her chin. There is no need for a scene. It is clear that there has been a deception. I have enough funds remaining for a ticket back to St. Louis, provided I leave on the morning train. She lied. She had $3 in her purse, barely enough for a meal, let alone a ticket. But she would drag herself back to the city by her fingernails before she would force a man to take her out of pity. I will release you from the arrangement, Claire continued, her voice ringing clear and cold in the icy air. You may tell your neighbors that I was found wanting. I will not hold you to your promise. Eli looked at her. He saw the tremor in her hands that she was trying so hard to hide. He saw the pride in the set of her jaw, a pride that matched his own. She was offering him an escape. She was giving him his dignity back, at the cost of her own. He looked at the crowd again. The smiles were fading, replaced by a predatory curiosity. If he sent her back, they would laugh about it for years. They would say Eli Ward was too weak to handle a challenge. They would say he sent a woman away alone because she was broken. But more than that, he heard the echo of his own letter. I keep my promises. He had given his word. He had signed a contract. He had promised protection. If he put her back on that train, she would have nothing. He saw it in her eyes, the terror behind the mask of calm. She had nowhere to go. Eli Ward was a lonely man, and he was a hard man, but he was not a cruel one. He turned back to Sterling. Give me the papers. Sterling blinked. Pardon? The marriage license. Eli snapped. Give it here. You mean to proceed? Sterling stammered, fumbling in his coat pocket. I said I would marry her, Eli said, his voice loud enough for the crowd to hear. I do not go back on my word, not for a snowstorm, and not for a lie. He snatched the papers from Sterling's hand. He did not look at the broker again. He walked to the wheelchair and stood over Claire. She looked up at him, her eyes wide, stunned. We are going to the church, he said gruffly. Unless you have changed your mind. Claire stared at him. She searched his face for mockery, for cruelty, but found only a grim, stony resolve. He did not want her, that was plain, but he would not abandon her. It was a poor foundation for a marriage, but it was the only one she had. No, Mr. Ward, she whispered. I have not changed my mind. Eli nodded once. He moved behind the chair, his large hands gripping the handles. He ignored the stares of the townspeople as he pushed her forward, the wheels crunching over the gravel. "Clear the way," he barked at a group of miners blocking the path. They scrambled aside. The wedding was brief and joyless. The church was cold, the stove unlit on a weekday afternoon. The Reverend Thomas, a man with a perpetual cough, looked from Eli to the wheelchair and back again, hesitantly opening his book. There was no aisle wide enough for the chair to reach the altar properly, so Claire sat wedged between the front pew and the communion rail, her position awkward and angled. Eli stood beside her, towering and stiff, his hat held against his chest. A few village children had followed them and were pressing their faces against the church windows, their breath fogging the glass as they stared at the crippled bride. Claire kept her eyes on the preacher's vestments, refusing to look at the window or at the man standing beside her. "Do you, Eli Ward, take this woman?" "I do," Eli said. It sounded less like a vow and more like a sentence he was accepting. "And you, Claire Monroe?" "I do," Claire said softly. When the ceremony was done, there was no kiss. The preacher did not suggest it, and neither of them moved to initiate it. Eli simply signed the register with a heavy, scratching hand, and Claire followed, her signature elegant and fluid beside his block letters. They walked and rolled, in silence, to the boarding house. Eli had rented a room for the night, knowing they could not make the ascent to the cabin in the dark. The landlady, Mrs. Gable, pursed her lips as she watched Eli maneuver the wheelchair through the narrow front door. "Mind the paint," she scolded, "and I will not have those wheels tracking mud on my carpets." "I will carry her," Eli said shortly. He bent down. "May I?" he asked, though he was already reaching for her. "Yes," Claire said, her voice tight. He scooped her up. She was lighter than he expected, lighter than a sack of grain. Her arm went instinctively around his neck to steady herself. He could feel the warmth of her through the layers of wool. It was a shock to his system. He had not held a woman in 10 years. He could feel the unnatural lightness of her lower body, the way her skirts hung empty. He tried not to grimace, tried not to think about it. But the physical reality of her disability was pressing against his chest. He carried her up the stairs, the wood creaking under his boots. He kicked the door to room 4 open and set her gently on the edge of the bed. She smoothed her skirts immediately, covering the space where her legs ended, recreating the illusion of wholeness. Eli retreated to the window, staring out at the darkening street. He felt trapped. He felt like a wolf that had walked into a cage and heard the door click shut. "Mr. Ward," Claire said into the silence. He turned. She was sitting on the edge of the mattress, her hands folded in her lap. She had removed her bonnet, revealing thick, dark hair that caught the lamplight. She was, he realized with a start, a handsome woman. Her face was intelligent, her eyes large and expressive. If he looked only from the waist up, she was everything he had hoped for. "You are angry," she said. It was a statement, not a question. "I do not like being played for a fool," Eli said. "I did not lie to you." "Eli," she said, using his name for the first time. "But I allowed Mr. Sterling to omit the truth. For that, I am sorry. It was an act of cowardice." "How did it happen?" Eli asked. He needed to know. He needed to understand what he was dealing with. "A wagon accident," she said, her voice devoid of self-pity. 3 years ago, a driver lost control on a steep hill. I was thrown. The wheels, they crushed my legs. The doctors took them to save my life." She looked down at her hands. "I spent a year in a bed. My family, they did not know what to do with me. A woman who cannot walk, cannot dance, cannot host, cannot be a proper wife in their eyes. They wanted to put me in a home for the incurable. I refused. I sold my mother's jewelry to pay Mr. Sterling." She looked up, her eyes fierce. "I can cook, I can sew, I can wash clothes, I can read and write and keep accounts. I am not useless. Mr. Ward, I just cannot walk." Eli looked at her. He saw the steel in her spine. He saw the desperation she was trying to mask with dignity. He felt the anger in his chest cool, replaced by a heavy, aching sadness. I believe you, he said. But this mountain, it is not St. Louis. It is a hard country. Claire, men die up here just from the cold. A broken leg is a death sentence in winter. And you, I will learn, she vowed. I will not be a burden. You are already a burden, he said, not unkindly, but with brutal honesty. Everything will be harder. For both of us. She flinched, but she did not look away. Then I will make it up to you in other ways. He rubbed a hand over his face. It is late. We should sleep. There was only one bed. It was narrow, meant for travelers, not newlyweds. Eli blew out the lamp, plunging the room into darkness. He took off his coat and boots, but slept in his shirt and trousers. He lay down on the far edge of the mattress, turning his back to her. Claire lay on the other side. Staring at the ceiling she could not see. She could feel the heat radiating from his body. Inches away, she could hear his breathing, slow and deliberate. Outside, the wind rattled the window pane, a sound like skeletal fingers tapping on the glass. She was married. She was safe. For now. But she lay next to a stranger who thought of her as a burden, in a town that thought of her as a joke, heading toward a wilderness she had never seen. A single tear leaked from the corner of her eye and slid into her hair. She held her breath, terrified he would hear her cry. Eli heard the catch in her breath. He lay awake for a long time, his hand resting near the knife he kept in his belt, wondering how in God's name he was going to keep them both alive. The dawn broke gray and bitter. The sky was a sheet of iron, promising snow. They ate a silent breakfast of porridge and coffee in the dining room, ignoring the whispers of the other guests. Loading the wagon was a puzzle Eli had not anticipated. He had brought a buckboard wagon, borrowed from the livery, to haul her and her trunk up the mountain trail, knowing Buster could not carry her safely. He lifted Claire onto the wagon seat, wrapping her in buffalo robes until only her face was visible. Then he had to deal with the chair. It was awkward and bulky. He folded it as best he could and lashed it into the bed of the wagon, tying it down with rope alongside the sacks of flour and beans. "Ready?" he asked, climbing onto the bench beside her. "Ready?" she said. The journey was a nightmare from the first mile. The road out of Silver Creek was rutted and frozen hard as stone. The wagon lacked springs. Every bump, every rock, every pothole sent a jarring shock through the wood and into their bodies. For Eli, it was uncomfortable. For Claire, it was agony. Her amputated limbs were sensitive, the scars still prone to aching in the cold. The constant jolting sent spikes of pain shooting up her spine. She gripped the edge of the seat. Her teeth clenched so hard her jaw ached. Eli watched her from the corner of his eye. He saw her wince. He saw the sweat beading on her upper lip despite the freezing wind. "We can stop," he offered after an hour. "Keep going," she gasped. "Just get us there." The trail wound upward, leaving the scrub oak behind and entering the deep timber. The air grew thinner, sharper. The drop-off on the right side of the trail became sheer, a 1,000-foot plunge into the canyon below. Claire looked down once and quickly looked away, vertigo spinning in her head. The wagon wheels crunched on the gravel, inches from the edge. "Trust the mules," Eli said, sensing her fear. "They know where their feet are." Around noon, the trail dipped through a hollow where a spring had overflowed and frozen, then thawed into a thick, black mud. The mules hit the bog and strained, their hooves sucking and popping. The wagon lurched forward, then sank. The rear wheel on Claire's side dropped deep into the muck with a sickening squelch. The wagon groaned and halted, tilted dangerously to the right. "Damn," Eli muttered. He jumped down, his boots sinking into the sludge. "Sit still," he ordered. "Don't move your weight." Claire sat frozen, gripping the rail. The wagon was tipped at a terrifying angle. If it tipped further, she would slide out. She was helpless. She could not jump down. She could not help pushing. She was dead weight. I can try to lean the other way," she offered weakly. "Just stay put," Eli barked, grabbing the muddy spokes of the wheel. He strained, his back muscles bunching under his coat. He shouted at the mules, slapping their rumps. The animals heaved. Eli shoved. The wheel held fast for a terrifying second, then popped free with a spray of mud that coated Eli from chest to knee. The wagon leveled out. Eli stood panting, wiping mud from his face. He looked at Claire. She was pale as death, her eyes wide with terror. "I am sorry," she whispered. "I am useless to you." Eli looked at the mud on his coat, then at her terrified face. He walked to the water skin hanging from the side of the wagon and took a drink, spitting out the dust. "You didn't sink the wheel. Claire, the mud did. Stop apologizing for existing." He climbed back up, wet and cold, and snapped the reins. An hour later, they reached a crest known as Dead Man's Lookout. The sun had broken through the clouds, illuminating the vast panorama of the San Juans. "Stop," Claire said suddenly. "We are losing light." Eli grunted. "Please," she said. "I need to stretch. The pain. I need to move." Eli pulled the mules to a halt. He walked around to the back, untied the chair, and set it on the rocky ground. Then he came to her side of the wagon. "Put your arms around my neck," he instructed. She reached down, wrapping her arms around his shoulders. He grasped her waist, his hands spanning her ribs. He lifted her, turning to place her in the chair. For a moment, he held her suspended between the wagon and the ground. Her face was inches from his. Her breath plumed in the cold air, mingling with him. He could see the flecks of gold in her dark eyes. He could feel the rapid beat of her heart against his chest. It was intimate in a way that unsettled him. He was holding her entire weight, her entire existence, in his hands. He lowered her gently into the chair and tucked the blankets back around her. Claire wheeled herself to the edge of the overlook. She gasped. Before her lay an ocean of peaks, jagged and white, stretching into eternity. Dark forests of spruce carpeted the slopes, broken by the silver thread of a river miles below. A hawk screamed high above, riding a thermal. It was a landscape of savage, indifferent beauty. It was huge. It was wild. "I have never seen anything like it," she whispered. Tears filled her eyes, spilling over to freeze on her cheeks. "It is so big. It makes you feel like nothing, and like everything." Eli stood behind her, watching her. Most city women he had met complained about the cold, or the wind, or the emptiness. Claire was crying at the beauty of it. She looked small in the chair, broken in body, but she was drinking in the mountain like a starving woman. He realized then that she had a soul that matched the land. She was not shrinking from it. She was meeting it. "It gets in your blood," Eli said quietly. "After a while, the city feels like a prison." "My body has been in a prison for 3 years," Claire said, wiping her eyes. This looks like freedom." She looked back at him, and for the first time, her smile reached her eyes. It was a tentative, fragile thing, but it transformed her face. Eli felt a shift in his chest. The anger at the broker remained, but the resentment toward the woman was cracking. "We have to go," he said, his voice softer than before. "The sun is dropping." They reached the cabin at twilight. It sat in a clearing surrounded by towering ponderosa pines, a squat, solid structure with smoke curling from the chimney. The fire Eli had banked days ago had burned down to embers, but the cabin would still hold a faint warmth. Eli pulled the wagon up to the front. He looked at the cabin through Claire's eyes for the first time. The porch was 3 feet off the ground. There were 3 steep log steps leading up to it. The door was narrow. Inside, he knew the floor was rough-hewn planks with gaps. It was a fortress for a man. It was an obstacle course for her. He helped her down from the wagon, carrying her to the porch steps. He sat her on the top step, then went back to the chair. He had to carry the chair up, then lift her into it. "I will build a ramp," he muttered as he struggled to maneuver the chair through the doorway. The wheels scraped the jambs on both sides. "Tomorrow, I will build a ramp." He got her inside. The cabin was dim, smelling of pine resin and wood smoke. He lit the kerosene lamp on the table. Claire looked around. It was a bachelor's home, a single table with 1 chair, a narrow bed in the corner, high shelves packed with tins and tools, A fireplace made of river stone, a bearskin rug on the floor. It was clean. She gave him that, but everything was high. The water bucket was on a stand she couldn't reach. The skillet hung on a hook above her head. The bed was high off the floor to keep away drafts. "It is cozy," she lied. "It is small," Eli corrected. "And it is not built for you." He started a fire, feeding kindling to the embers until flames licked up the chimney. He put a pot of coffee on to boil and sliced some of the smoked venison. They ate at the small table. Eli sat in the only chair. Claire sat in her wheelchair. The silence between them was thick, but it was not as hostile as it had been at the station. It was the silence of two people assessing the wreckage of their expectations. Claire put down her fork. Her hands were trembling again from exhaustion. "Eli," she said. He looked up, holding a piece of bread. "Do you regret it?" she asked. "Do not lie to me. I can bear the truth, but I cannot bear false kindness." Eli chewed slowly, swallowing. He looked at the fire, then at her. He looked at the empty space beneath the table where her feet should have been. He thought about the stairs in town. He thought about the difficult journey. He thought about the winter coming down hard, trapping them here together. "I regret that Sterling lied," Eli said slowly. "I regret that he took my money and your dignity and played us against each other." He met her eyes. "But you are here now, and you did not complain once on that trail. Not when the wheel stuck, not when the cold got into your bones. I saw you hurting. Claire, I know you were." She lowered her gaze. "I do not know if this will work," Eli said honestly. "I do not know how to be a husband to a woman in a chair. I am scared I will fail you, but—" He paused. "No, I do not regret you. Not yet." It was not a declaration of love. It was barely a compliment. But to Claire, it felt like a lifeline thrown into a storm-tossed sea. "I will try." "Eli," she whispered, "I swear to you, I will try. We will see the winter through," Eli said. "If, come spring, you want to leave, I will take you back to the train myself." "Agreed," she said. Outside, the wind picked up, howling around the corners of the cabin. The first heavy flakes of the storm began to fall, thick and white, erasing the trail, erasing the world below, sealing them into the high country. They were alone, two strangers in a small room, bound by a lie and a promise, as the snow began to bury them alive. The snow came not as a gentle dusting, but as a siege. By December, the cabin was no longer just a home. It was a fortress holding back a white, frozen ocean. The drifts piled high against the north wall, reaching the eaves, and the wind scoured the logs with a sound like gravel being shaken in a tin can. The world beyond the tree line ceased to exist. There was no Silver Creek, no railroad, no past life in St. Louis. There was only the fire, the stockpile of dried beans and venison, and the suffocating proximity of two people trying to survive the winter and each other. Eli Ward knew the rhythm of a mountain winter. He knew how to ration coffee until the grounds were pale and tasteless. He knew how to bank a fire so it held heat until dawn. But he did not know how to share this space with a woman who could not walk. The cabin, built for a solitary man of 6 feet, was a daily gauntlet for Claire. Every morning brought a fresh humiliation. The wash basin was set on a stand too high for her to reach from her chair, forcing her to ask Eli to bring it down. The shelves where the flour and salt were kept required her to balance precariously on one hand while reaching with the other, her center of gravity dangerously shifting. But the worst indignity was the outhouse. It stood 20 yards from the cabin door, across a path now buried under 3 feet of powder. It was impossible for her to reach. Eli had rigged a curtain in the corner of the room around a chamber pot, a solution that was practical but mortifying. Every time she retreated behind that calico sheet, the silence in the cabin grew heavy. She could feel Eli trying to make himself small, trying not to hear, trying to give her a privacy that the small room refused to grant. Claire's frustration festered like a splinter under the skin. She hated the sound of her own voice asking for help. "Eli, can you reach the skillet?" "Eli, The wheel is stuck on the rug. Eli, I dropped the thimble. She saw the weariness in his eyes. He was doing the work of two people outside, clearing the roof so the weight of the snow did not crush them, chopping endless cords of wood, checking traps in brutal conditions, and then coming inside to be her hands and legs. One morning, Eli watched her struggle to navigate the narrow gap between the table and the hearth. Her knuckles scraped against the rough wood of the table leg, leaving a smear of blood. She did not cry out, but she squeezed her eyes shut, her chest heaving with silent rage. Eli set down his coffee cup. He pulled on his heavy coat and went outside without a word. Claire thought he was leaving to check the lines. Instead, she heard the rhythmic rasp of a saw from the lean-to shed. He was out there for hours. When he returned, he brought the smell of fresh pine sawdust and cold air with him. He carried a plank of wood and his tool belt. He moved the table. He took the high shelves down from the wall, hammering and prying until the nails shrieked. He remounted them 3 feet lower, well within her reach. He took his axe and widened the interior doorway to the small back room, shaving away the log frame until her wheels could pass without scraping. He did not stop there. Over the next week, the cabin transformed. He built a sturdy, gentle ramp over the high threshold of the front door, securing it with iron spikes so it would not slip under ice. He took her wheelchair, the elegant, city-made thing that was rattling apart on the uneven floorboards, and reinforced it. He replaced the delicate front casters with wider, sturdier wheels he had carved from seasoned oak, rimming them with strips of leather from an old saddle to grip the floor. He worked with a grim, silent intensity. He did not ask for her opinion. He simply watched where she struggled and fixed it. Claire watched him one evening as he oiled the axle of her chair, his large, scarred hands moving with surprising delicacy. "You do not have to do all this," she said, her voice tight. "I was managing—" Eli looked up, wiping grease from his thumb. "You were scraping your knuckles raw. Claire, and you were looking at that flour sack like it was an enemy soldier. I feel I am turning your home upside down," she admitted, looking at the lowered shelves. "It must be annoying for you to stoop to get the coffee." "It is better than watching you nearly tip over," Eli grunted. He tested the wheel. It spun silently, smooth and true. "This is not just my home anymore. We have to live here, both of us." It was the closest he had come to an apology for his reaction at the train station. Claire ran her hand over the smooth wood of the new ramp later that day. She felt a lump in her throat. He was not a man of poetry, but the labor he had poured into these modifications spoke louder than any sonnet. He was making space for her. He was acknowledging that she was here to stay. But the truce between them was fragile, built on politeness and survival. The underlying tension, the reality of her body and his solitude, remained. It broke 2 weeks later. The wind had been howling for days, a relentless gale that rattled the roof shakes. Eli was preparing to go out for firewood. He bundled into his buffalo coat, pulling his hat low. "Stay away from the door," he warned. "The wind is pulling hard from the north." "I know," Claire said, sitting by the fire with her mending. Eli opened the door. The wind did not just blow. It exploded into the room. A vortex of snow and freezing air blasted inside, extinguishing the lamp and sending the fire flaring dangerously. The door was ripped from Eli's grip, slamming back against the exterior wall with a crack that sounded like a gunshot. Eli stumbled out into the drift to grab the handle, fighting the gale. Claire saw the snow swirling across the floor, soaking the rug. She saw the papers on the table, Eli's trapping ledgers, beginning to scatter toward the hearth. Without thinking, she spun her chair around and lunged for the doorframe, intending to help pull the heavy oak slab shut once Eli got a grip on it. She misjudged the new ramp in her haste. One wheel caught the edge of the rug, and the wind hit her full in the face, blinding her. The chair tipped. There was a sickening lurch of gravity, and then she was falling. She hit the floor hard, her shoulder taking the brunt of the impact. The chair clattered onto its side, one wheel spinning uselessly in the air. She lay sprawled on the rough planks, her skirts twisted around her hips, the empty space where her legs should have been painfully obvious. She gasped, the wind sucking the breath from her lungs. She tried to push herself up, but her arms were tangled in her shawl. She felt like a beetle on its back. Helpless, exposed, ridiculous. "Damn it!" she screamed, her voice cracking. "Damn this body!" Eli appeared in the doorway, wrestling the door shut against the wind. He slammed the bolt home, cutting off the howl, leaving a sudden, ringing silence. He turned and saw her. The color drained from his face. "Claire!" He dropped the wood he was carrying and rushed to her. He fell to his knees, his hands hovering over her, terrified to touch her, terrified she was broken. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, his voice shaking. "Did you hit your head?" "Don't," she hissed, slapping his hand away. Tears of humiliation burned hot in her eyes, scalding her cheeks. "Do not touch me. Do not look at me." "Claire, let me help you up," Eli said, ignoring her protest. He reached for her waist. "I said leave me alone," she shouted, the sound tearing from her throat. She pushed against his chest, her strength surprising him. "I am sick of it. I am sick of being picked up like a child. I am sick of you looking at me like I am made of glass." Eli sat back on his heels, stunned. The firelight flickered over her face, revealing a mask of raw, naked anguish. "I am tired, Eli," she sobbed, her composure shattering completely. "I am so tired of being a burden. I see you watching me. I see you counting the extra minutes every chore takes. I see you wondering why you saddled yourself with half a woman." "That is not true," Eli said, his voice low. "It is true," she cried. "Everyone sees it. Do you know what it was like in the institution? The bath attendants would come in, 2 big women, and they would strip me and scrub me like I was a dirty plate. They did not speak to me. They spoke over me. 'Careful with the stump,' they would say. 'Make sure you dry the scar tissue.' I was not a person. It was a task." She wiped her face furiously with her sleeve. "And then the men in the street who would stare at the chair and then look away quickly, as if looking at me would make them impotent, as if I was invisible because I did not stand at their eye level. And now you are kind, Eli. You are decent, but you look at me with that same pity, and I hate it. I would rather you hit me than pity me." The room was silent, save for the crackle of the fire and Claire's ragged breathing. She lay on the floor, defeated, waiting for him to offer a platitude or to walk away. Eli did neither. He sat on the floor beside her, crossing his long legs, ignoring the cold draft seeping through the cracks. He looked at his hands, scarred, calloused, stained with pine pitch. "My brother, Samuel," Eli began quietly. "He was 22. He could play the fiddle better than anyone I ever heard." Claire stopped crying, her breath catching. He had never spoken of his brother in more than a sentence. "We were checking the High Line," Eli continued, staring into the fire. "The storm came out of nowhere, just like today. White out. You could not see your hand in front of your face. Samuel slipped. He went over the edge of the ravine. He did not fall far, maybe 20 feet, but he broke his leg. Bone came right through the skin." Eli swallowed hard. "I tried to carry him. I carried him for 3 miles in that snow. But the wind, it kept pushing us down. I was exhausted. I could not feel my hands. I could not feel my feet. Samuel told me to leave him. He said if I didn't, we would both die." He looked at Claire then, his gray eyes shining with unshed tears. "I left him. I built a shelter. I covered him with every coat I had, and I went for help. It took me 6 hours to get back on the sled. He was gone, frozen solid. His eyes were open." "Oh, Eli," Claire whispered. "I did not save him," Eli said, his voice cracking. "I was strong. I was the big brother. I was supposed to protect him, and I failed. That is why I live up here. Claire, that is why I am alone. Because I decided a long time ago that it was better to be alone than to fail someone I loved again." He reached out and took her hand. His grip was firm, grounding. "When I look at you," he said, "I do not see a burden. I see the bravest thing I have ever known, and I am terrified. I am terrified that this mountain will hurt you, and I will not be fast enough or strong enough to stop it. It is not a pity. Claire, it is fear. I cannot bury another person I care about in this snow." Claire looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the boy who had lost his brother hiding inside the hardened mountain man. Her anger evaporated, replaced by a deep, aching empathy. "You will not bury me, Eli," she said softly. "I am harder to kill than I look." He managed a weak, crooked smile. "I am starting to see that." He stood up then and offered his hands, not to lift her like a child, but to anchor her. She gripped his wrists, and he pulled, providing the leverage she needed to swing her torso up and lift herself back into the chair. It was a partnership of movement, clumsy but effective. That night, the air in the cabin changed. The wall of polite distance had been breached. They began to talk, really talk, in the evenings, while the wind battered the walls. They sat by the fire. Claire read aloud from the few books Eli owned: Shakespeare, a Bible, a water-damaged copy of Ivanhoe. Eli told her stories of the war, of the strange things he had seen in the woods, of the way the aspen trees turned to gold in September. They teased each other. Claire mocked his terrible coffee. Eli made fun of her city accent. Laughter, rusty and unfamiliar, began to echo in the small room. And with the laughter came something else. Eli found his eyes drawn to her constantly. He watched the firelight play on the curve of her throat as she laughed. He watched her hands, capable and sure, as she mended his socks. He noticed the way her dark hair curled at the nape of her neck when she pinned it up. She was not just a wife in name. She was a woman, warm and alive in his cold world. Claire felt it too. She felt his gaze on her, heavy and warm. She noticed the breadth of his shoulders as he chopped wood. She noticed the gentleness in his hands when he whittled by the fire. A hunger began to wake in her, a physical longing she thought she had left behind in the wreckage of the carriage accident. One evening in late January, Claire was peeling potatoes with a sharp paring knife. The knife slipped, slicing into the fleshy part of her thumb. She hissed in pain, dropping the potato. "Let me see," Eli said, instantly at her side. He took her hand. The cut was not deep, but it bled freely. He fetched a basin of water and a strip of clean cloth. He washed the blood away, his head bent low over her hand. Claire watched him. He was so close. She could smell the scent of him, wood smoke, soap, and the musk of male skin. Her heart began to hammer against her ribs. He dried her hand and wrapped the cloth around her thumb. He did not let go. He held her hand in his, running his thumb over her knuckles. He looked up. His eyes were dark, the pupils blown wide. The air between them crackled, sudden and electric. "Claire," he breathed. He leaned in. He hesitated, a fraction of an inch from her lips, his breath ghosting over her skin. He was giving her a choice. Claire closed the distance. Her lips met his. It was tentative at first, a question asked in the silence. Then, Eli groaned, a low sound in his throat, and his mouth opened on hers. The kiss deepened, becoming hungry, desperate. It tasted of coffee and longing. Eli's hand came up to cup her face, his calloused fingers tangling in her hair. Claire gripped the front of his shirt, pulling him closer. For a glorious, spinning moment, she was not a cripple in a wheelchair. She was a woman on fire, her body singing with a sensation she had been denied for years. Then, Eli pulled back. He jerked away as if he had been burned, his chest heaving. He stared at her, his eyes wide with panic. I should not have done that," he stammered. He stood up, knocking his chair back. "I am sorry." "Eli," Claire whispered, her lips swollen and tingling. "I do not want you to think—" He ran a hand through his hair. "I do not want to take advantage. You are here because you have nowhere else. I do not want you to feel obligated." "Obligated?" Claire repeated, hurt flashing in her eyes. "Do you think I kissed you to pay for my room and board?" "I do not know," Eli said, retreating to the door. I need some air." He fled into the night, leaving Claire alone by the fire, touching her lips, torn between the thrill of his desire and the sting of his retreat. For the next 3 days, they lived in a charged, agonizing limbo. They were polite. They avoided touching. But every time their eyes met, the memory of that kiss sparked between them. They woke in the night, listening to each other breathe, the space between them on the bed feeling like a canyon charged with lightning. Then the flour ran out. "I have to go to town," Eli announced one morning, staring into the empty sack. "We are low on lamp oil, too." "The weather is turning," Claire said, looking at the gray sky. "The clouds are banking over the ridge." "I can beat it," Eli said, strapping on his snowshoes. "If I leave now, I can be back by nightfall. I will take the sled." He prepared the cabin for her. He stacked wood right inside the door. He filled the water bucket. He placed the rifle within her reach. "Lock the door behind me," he said. "Do not open it for anyone." "Be careful, Eli," she said, anxiously tightening her chest. He looked at her, and for a second, she thought he might kiss her again, but he just nodded, turned, and disappeared into the white trees. Claire was alone. The silence was absolute. She busied herself with chores, sewing and reading. But by noon, the light began to fail. The sky turned a bruised purple. The wind did not build gradually this time. It slammed into the mountain with the force of a locomotive. The storm hit an hour later. It was a blizzard of biblical proportions. The cabin groaned under the assault. Snow pelted the window like buckshot. Claire sat by the fire, her heart pounding. "He is out there. He is out there in this." Then, a sound tore through the cabin, a loud crack followed by a banging. The heavy wooden shutter on the single window had torn loose from its latch. It was banging against the log wall. Shattered glass flying inward. Snow began to pour into the cabin through the broken pane. If she didn't close it, the fire would die. The cold would kill her. Claire wheeled toward the window, but the wind was blasting through the opening, driving snow into the room, creating a drift on the floor. Her wheels spun in the slick, melting mess. She could not get close enough to reach the latch. She gritted her teeth. There was no one to call, no one to help. She set the brake on her chair. She grabbed the armrests and lowered herself to the floor. The cold was instant, seeping through her skirts. She dragged herself forward, using her elbows and hands, army crawling through the snow and broken glass. A shard sliced her palm, but she did not stop. She reached the wall beneath the window. The shutter was banging violently. She had to time it. She pulled herself up, balancing on her torso, straining every muscle in her back and arms. The wind fought her. It pushed the shutter open every time she grabbed it. She screamed with effort, her muscles burning, her fingernails clawing at the wood. "I will not die here," she shouted at the storm. "I will not!" With one final, desperate heave, she grabbed the iron ring of the shutter and slammed it shut. She threw the latch. The banging stopped. She collapsed on the floor, panting, shivering violently, but she wasn't done. The snow in the room would melt and freeze the floor. The fire was sputtering. She dragged herself to the hearth. She threw log after log onto the fire until it roared. She used a towel to stop the melting snow. She did not get back in her chair. She stayed on the floor, close to the heat, wrapping herself in the bearskin rug, holding the rifle. She waited. Hours passed. Darkness fell, thick and impenetrable. She dozed, waking with a start at every sound. "He is dead," she thought. "He is like Samuel. He is gone." Then a thud against the door. A scratching. "Claire!" The voice was weak, muffled by the wind. Claire dragged herself to the door. She reached up and threw the bolt. Eli fell into the room. He was a snowman, coated in ice from head to foot. His beard was a mask of frost. He stumbled, nearly collapsing. He saw her on the floor. He saw the blood on her hand, the broken glass, the puddle of water. He saw the fire roaring in the grate. He kicked the door shut and fell to his knees, crawling to her. He stripped off his frozen gloves, his hands shaking uncontrollably. "Claire," he rasped. "I thought, the window. I saw the broken glass outside." "The shutter broke," she said, her teeth chattering. "I fixed it." Eli looked at the heavy shutter. then at her. He looked at the trail of wet drag marks across the floor. He realized what she had done. A woman with no legs had fought a blizzard and won. She had saved their home. She had saved herself. He did not see a cripple. He saw a warrior. "You fixed it," he repeated, awe in his voice. "I told you," she whispered, her eyes fierce despite her exhaustion. "I am hard to kill." Something broke inside Eli then. The last wall of his fear, the last remnant of his hesitation. He reached out and pulled her into his arms. He buried his face in her neck, sobbing dry, heaving breaths of relief. "I was so scared," he confessed. "God, Claire, I was so scared I wouldn't make it back to you." "You are here," she soothed him, holding his frozen shoulders. "We are both here." He pulled back to look at her. Her face was smudged with soot and blood. Her hair was wild. She was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. "You are incredible," he said. "You are magnificent." He kissed her. This was not the tentative, frightened kiss of 3 days ago. This was slow. It was deep. It was a claim. He kissed the soot on her cheek. He kissed her eyelids. He kissed her mouth with a reverence that made her tremble. "Eli," she sighed against his lips. He lifted her effortlessly, but this time, he did not put her in the chair. He carried her to the narrow bed in the corner. He laid her down, his eyes never leaving hers. "I want you," he said, his voice rough with truth. Not out of pity, not out of duty. "I want you, Claire, all of you." Claire reached up and touched his face, tracing the scar on his jaw. She felt the heat of him, the solid reality of his desire. "Then show me," she whispered. He lowered himself beside her. The storm raged outside, burying the world in white. But inside the cabin, the cold had finally been defeated. They lay together in the firelight, two broken people who had found that their jagged edges fit together perfectly, stepping into the terrified, wonderful territory of a real marriage. The thaw arrived in late March, not with a gentle warmth, but with a violent groaning of the earth. The rivers, choked with ice for months, swelled into roaring brown torrents that chewed at the banks. The snow on the lower slopes grew heavy and wet, a treacherous slush that the locals called rotten snow, capable of swallowing a horse's leg to the hock. Eli Ward warned Claire that spring was often more dangerous than winter. "The mountain is waking up," he told her, sharpening his axe by the fire. "And it is hungry." But for Claire, the thaw meant liberation. The air smelled of wet pine needles and mud, a scent so rich and alive after the sterile chill of winter that it made her head spin. With the worst of the drifts melting, Eli began to venture further afield, checking the distant trap lines he had neglected during the blizzards and marking timber for the summer cut. Claire refused to remain idle. The days of sitting by the window watching the snow fall were over. She demanded the ledgers Eli kept, a chaotic mess of loose papers and charcoal scribbles stuffed into a tin box. "You are losing money on the beaver pelts," she informed him one evening, tapping a page with her pen. "The trader in Silver Creek is underpaying you by 15% based on the market rates in St. Louis, and you have no record of the timber you sold to the mine last autumn." Eli looked up from his whittling, surprised. "I keep it in my head." "Your head is not a legal document, Eli," she said, her tone brisk but affectionate. "We are going to organize this. If we are to improve the ranch, we need capital." She took over the finances, creating a neat, precise system that tracked every penny earned and spent. But her mind did not stop at numbers. She applied her intelligence to the mechanics of her daily life. She grew tired of waiting for Eli to fill the water barrel. One afternoon, while he was gone, she found a length of rope and an old block and tackle in the shed. She rigged a pulley system from the porch beam to the nearby creek. By the time Eli returned, she had hauled 3 buckets of water up to the porch without leaving her chair, her arms aching but her smile triumphant. She adapted the interior of the cabin further. She asked Eli to fasten a smooth, polished board between the bed and her chair, allowing her to slide from one to the other using only her upper body strength. eliminating the need for him to lift her every night and morning. She was reclaiming her independence, inch by inch. But as the days grew longer and the sun warmer, a different kind of tension began to bloom between them. It was not the fearful tension of the winter, but a heavy, humid weight that settled in the small cabin. They shared stories now, trading pieces of their pasts like currency. Eli spoke of his childhood in Kentucky, of a dream he once held to breed Morgan horses, strong enough for the mountains but fast enough for the plains. Claire spoke of the schoolroom where she had taught before the accident, of the smell of chalk dust and the joy of watching a child unlock the meaning of a sentence. "I miss it," she admitted one night. "I miss feeling useful to someone other than myself." "You are useful here," Eli said, his voice rough. "You anchor me. Claire, I was drifting before you came." The words hung in the air, charged and unspoken. One evening in May, the air was so warm they left the cabin door open. They sat on the porch, watching the sunset bleed purple and gold across the peaks. The frogs were singing in the meltwater ponds, a chaotic, joyous chorus. Claire wore a light shawl over her shoulders. She watched Eli as he smoked his pipe, his profile sharp against the dying light. He was a handsome man, she realized, not in the polished way of her former fiancé, but in a way that was enduring, like the granite ridges above them. She felt a familiar ache in her chest, a longing that she had tried to suppress for months. She remembered the kiss during the blizzard, the heat of it, the sudden, terrifying hunger in his eyes. They had danced around it since, terrified of breaking the fragile peace they had built. "Eli," she said softly. He turned to her, the pipe smoke curling around his head. "Yes?" Claire looked down at her hands, then forced herself to look him in the eye. "Why do you stay on that side of the bed?" Eli stiffened. He tapped the pipe out on the porch rail, the ashes falling like gray snow. "I told you, Claire, I will not force you. I will not make you feel like payment for a debt." "Is that the only reason?" she asked. Her voice trembled, but she pushed on. "Or is it because of what I am? Because there's not enough of me left to want?" Eli dropped the pipe. It clattered onto the wood. He moved so fast she flinched. He knelt beside her chair, his hands gripping the armrests, trapping her, his face inches from hers. "Look at me," he commanded. His voice was low, vibrating with a raw intensity that made her breath catch. "Do you think I stay away because I do not want you? Claire, I barely sleep. I listen to you breathe. I watch the firelight on your hair, and I have to go outside and chop wood until my hands blister just to keep from touching you." "But my legs," she whispered, tears spilling over. "I am not whole. Eli, I am broken. How can you want a wife who is truncated?" "You are not broken," Eli said fiercely. He took her hand and pressed it against his chest, over his heart. "You are the most whole person I have ever known. You have a spine of steel and a heart as big as this sky. Do you think I care about legs? I care about the woman who saved my life in a blizzard. I care about the woman who laughs at my bad coffee." He leaned closer, his forehead resting against hers. "I want you, Claire. I ache for you. But I was scared. I was scared that if I touched you, you would only feel my pity. Or worse, you would feel obliged to let me." "I am not obliged," Claire sobbed, a laugh breaking through her tears. "I am your wife, Eli, and I am tired of being treated like a sister." He pulled back slightly, searching her face. "Are you sure? There is no going back. Claire, once I have you, I am not going to let you go." "I do not want to go back," she said. She reached up and cupped his face, her thumbs tracing the rough stubble on his cheeks. "Make me your wife, Eli, please." He stood up and lifted her from the chair. He did not carry her like a burden this time. He held her close, her body pressed against his chest, his arms strong and sure beneath her. He carried her into the darkening cabin and kicked the door shut, shutting out the frogs and the mountain night. He laid her on the bed. For the first time, he did not turn away to undress. He unbuttoned his shirt, his eyes locked on hers. letting her see him, the scars on his chest, the muscle built by years of hard labor, the trembling of his hands that betrayed his control. When he came to her, he was slow. He undressed her with a reverence that made her want to weep. When he exposed her legs, the smooth, scarred stumps that ended above the knee, she tried to cover herself, old shame flaring hot and bright. Eli gently pulled her hands away. He kissed her knee, then the scar tissue, his lips warm and soft against the skin she hated most. "Beautiful," he murmured against her skin. The words shattered her. A sob broke from her throat. And then he was kissing her mouth, swallowing the sound. The night was a revelation. It was clumsy at first, a navigation of bodies that did not fit together in the standard way, but they learned. Eli moved with a care that belied his size, supporting her weight, adjusting his own, listening to her sharp intakes of breath. But as the fear faded, the fire took over. Claire found that her body, which she had treated as a useless vessel for 3 years, was still capable of profound feeling. She felt electricity spark along her spine, felt the heavy, sweet pull of desire in her belly. She arched into him, her hands gripping his shoulders, discovering a strength in herself she did not know existed. When it was over, they lay tangled together in the cooling sheets, the firelight dying in the grate. Eli's arm was thrown over her, his face buried in her hair. Claire stared at the ceiling, feeling a strange, vibrating peace. She was not just a mind floating in a chair anymore. She was a body. She was flesh and blood and heat. She was cherished. The weeks that followed were the happiest of Claire's life. The cabin ceased to be a shelter and became a home. The silence that had once oppressed them was filled with easy conversation and the comfortable quiet of intimacy. Small touches became their language. Eli would brush her hair back when he passed her chair. Claire would rest her hand on his thigh when they sat at the table. They were hungry for each other, making up for lost time. But the world outside the cabin remained hard. In June, they made a trip to Silver Creek. They needed seed for the garden Claire planned to plant and iron for the horses. Eli drove the wagon, with Claire sitting beside him on the bench, strapped in with a leather belt he had fashioned for her safety. The town had thawed into a muddy bustle. As Eli tied the horses outside the general store, a group of men spilled out of the saloon next door. They were rough men, drift miners and cattle hands, smelling of whiskey and sweat. One of them, a man with a broken nose, nudged his companion. "Look there, it is the mountain man and his half-wife." The other man laughed, a wet, ugly sound. "I heard he got her for a discount. Pay for the head, get the rest for free." Claire stiffened, her face burning. She looked straight ahead, refusing to acknowledge them. But Eli had heard. He froze, his hand on the wagon rail. He turned slowly, his eyes dark and dangerous. He took a step toward the men. "Eli, no!" Claire hissed, grabbing his sleeve. "You got something to say to me?" Eli called out, his voice booming down the street. The miner with the broken nose stepped forward, grinning, just admiring the merchandise. Ward, wondering how a cripple earns her keep up there. "Does she crawl around the floor like a dog?" Eli roared. He lunged forward, his fists clenched. He wanted to destroy them. He wanted to break their jaws and make them swallow their teeth. "Eli!" Claire shouted, her voice sharp as a whip crack. "Stop!" Eli stopped, his chest heaving, 10 feet from the men. He looked back at her. "Do not," she said, her eyes locked with his. "They are not worth the blood on your knuckles. Get back in the wagon." Eli vibrated with rage. The miners were laughing now, sensing his hesitation. "Do what Mama says. Ward!" Eli looked at the men, etching their faces into his memory. Then he turned his back on them, a deliberate insult, and climbed back onto the wagon seat. He snapped the reins, and the horses lurched forward, spraying mud on the miners' boots. They rode in silence for a mile. Eli's knuckles were white on the reins. "I should have killed him," he ground out. "I should have beaten him until he could not speak. And then you would be in jail," Claire said calmly. "And I would be alone on the mountain. Is that what you want?" "I want them to respect you," Eli shouted, the shame of his inaction burning him. "I want to defend your honor." "My honor is not located in the mouths of drunks," Claire said. She reached over and pried one of his hands off the reins, interlacing her fingers with his. "Let them talk. Eli, they live in the mud. We live in the sky. Let them talk." Eli looked at her, at the fierce set of her jaw. She was stronger than him. He realized again. He squeezed her hand, the anger slowly draining away, leaving only a fierce, protective love. The summer storms in the San Juans were violent and sudden. In July, a week of heavy rain saturated the ground, turning the hard-packed earth into a slick, unstable slurry. Eli had gone up to the high ridge, 3 miles from the cabin, to check on a potential washout near his best timber stand. "I will be back by noon," he had promised, kissing Claire on the forehead. Noon came and went, then 2 o'clock, then 4. The sky turned a bruised black. Thunder rolled down the canyon like boulders crashing together. The rain intensified, drumming on the roof with a deafening roar. Claire sat by the window, her ledger forgotten in her lap. Eli was never late. He was precise as a clock. Dread, cold and sharp, began to coil in her stomach. Something was wrong. She wheeled herself to the door and opened it. The world was a wall of gray water. The trail was turning into a river. "Eli!" she screamed into the storm. Only the wind answered. She waited another hour. The light was beginning to fail. If he was hurt, if he was stuck out there in the cold rain, hypothermia would set in fast, or bears, or a fall. She could not wait. She went to the shed where they kept the gear. Eli had built a sled for hauling wood in the winter, a low, sturdy platform on runners. He had modified it in the spring with wheels for mud, intended for hauling stones. Claire worked with frantic efficiency. She whistled for Buster. The roan gelding. The horse was sheltering under the eaves of the lean-to. He came to her, his ears flat against the rain. "Good boy," she whispered, her hands shaking as she grabbed the harness. She could not saddle him. She could not ride him. She had no legs to grip the flanks, and without a special saddle, she would slide off in the wet. She hitched Buster to the wheeled sled. Then she dragged herself onto the low wooden platform. She used the leather straps Eli had installed for securing logs to strap herself down, binding her waist and thighs to the wood so she wouldn't be thrown off. She wrapped the reins around her hands. "Go on, Buster!" she shouted, snapping the leather. "Find him! Find Eli!" The horse surged forward into the storm. The journey was a nightmare. The sled bounced and skidded over roots and rocks, sending jarring shocks through Claire's spine. Mud sprayed up from the horse's hooves, coating her face, blinding her. She kept her head down, squinting against the deluge. The trail was steep. Twice, the sled tipped on a root, nearly rolling over, but the straps held her fast, and Buster's strength pulled her upright again. "Eli!" she screamed. Over and over, she found him a mile up the ridge. A section of the hillside had given way, sliding down in a slurry of mud and stone. A medium-sized pine tree had come down with it. Eli lay half buried in the mud, his left leg pinned beneath the trunk of the tree. He was conscious, but his face was gray, his eyes glazed with pain. He was shivering violently. He looked up as the horse and sled splashed through the mud. He blinked, thinking it was a hallucination. "Claire!" he croaked. "I am here!" she yelled. She halted Buster and fumbled with the buckles at her waist, freeing herself. She dragged herself off the sled and crawled through the mud to him. "My leg!" Eli gasped through chattering teeth. "Trapped! Ribs! Broken!" Claire looked at the tree. It was too heavy for her to lift. It was too heavy for Eli to lift, even if he wasn't injured. "I am going to get you out," she said, her voice calm with adrenaline. She crawled back to the sled. She unhitched the rope traces from the sled, leaving Buster in his harness. She took the long coil of rope Eli kept on the sled for timber hauling. She crawled back to the tree. She looped the rope around the trunk, tying a secure timber hitch. "This is going to hurt," she told Eli. She crawled back to Buster. She tied the other end of the rope to his harness. "Eli, when I shout, you have to pull your leg free," she yelled over the rain. Okay, Eli gritted out. Claire grabbed Buster's bridle. Back, she shouted, pushing the horse's chest. Back up! Buster, pull! The horse dug his hooves into the mud. The rope went taut. The tree groaned. It shifted, lifting 3 inches, then 6. Eli screamed, a raw, tearing sound, as he yanked his crushed leg out from under the crushing weight. Whoa! Claire shouted. The horse stopped. The tree slammed back down into the mud. But Eli was free. Claire scrambled to him. His leg was a mess, twisted at a wrong angle. The pant leg soaked in blood, but he was alive. We have to get you on the sled, she said. I can't walk, Eli gasped. I know, she said. Crawl. I will pull. It took 20 minutes of agonizing effort. Claire dragged him by his collar while he pushed with his good leg, groaning with every inch. She got him onto the flatbed of the sled. She covered him with the oilskin tarp she had brought. She hitched Buster back to the sled. There was no room for her on the platform with Eli. Hold on, she told him. She grabbed the bridle. She would have to lead the horse down the mountain in her hands. She wrapped the reins around her waist. She used her hands to hop-crawl alongside the horse's head, guiding him down the treacherous, slick trail. The return trip was a blur of pain. Claire's arms burned until they felt like lead. Her palms were shredded by rocks. The mud coated her like a second skin. But she did not stop. She thought of Eli's hands on her face. She thought of the way he looked at her in the morning light. Keep moving, keep moving. When the cabin came into view, dark and solid through the rain, Claire let out a sob that was torn from her soul. She got the horse into the lean-to. She couldn't get Eli inside the cabin alone. He had passed out from the pain. She covered him with every blanket she could find, started a fire in the shed to keep him warm, and tended to his leg right there in the straw. She cut away the boot. She set the bone as best she could, binding it tight with splints made from kindling. She washed the mud from his face. She stayed with him all night, shivering in her wet clothes, holding his hand. When dawn broke, the rain stopped. Eli opened his eyes. He looked around the shed. He looked at his splinted leg. Then he looked at Claire. She was slumped against a hay bale, her face bruised, her hands bandaged, her dress ruined. She looked like she had been through a war. Claire, he whispered. She opened her eyes instantly. I am here. You came for me, he said, his voice thick with wonder. In the storm. You came. You were late for dinner, she said, a weak smile touching her lips. Eli reached out and took her hand. He squeezed it, ignoring the pain in his ribs. He looked at her not as a wife he needed to protect, but as a force of nature that had protected him. I thought I was the strong one, he said softly. I was wrong. We are both strong, Eli, she said, leaning her head against his shoulder. That is how we survive. Eli closed his eyes, tears leaking out to mix with the dirt on his face. He had ordered a mail-order bride to cure his loneliness. He had found a savior instead, and as he drifted back into sleep, he knew with absolute certainty that he would spend the rest of his life trying to be worthy of her. The weeks following the accident were a blur of pain and confined frustration for Eli Ward. The man who was accustomed to climbing ridges before dawn and felling timber until dusk was suddenly reduced to the confines of a mattress, his world shrinking to the 4 walls of the cabin. His left leg was splinted tight, bound with strips of linen and cedar bark, while his ribs ached with every breath, turning a simple cough into a jagged ordeal. For Claire, the days became a relentless cycle of labor. She was the first to wake, sliding from the bed to her chair in the gray light of dawn to stoke the fire. She cooked, she cleaned, and she tended to Eli with a clinical efficiency that masked her own exhaustion. She changed his dressings, washing the angry bruising on his leg with boiled water and comfrey poultices, ignoring his grunts of embarrassment. But the hardest work lay outside. With Eli bedridden, the livestock in the land fell to her. She dragged herself up and down the porch ramp a dozen times a day. She wheeled herself to the lean-to to feed Buster and the mule, maneuvering through the drying mud of the yard with arms that burned from the effort. She hauled water from the creek using the pulley system she had rigged. But even with the mechanical aid, the weight of the buckets threatened to pull her from her seat. Eli watched her from the bed. He saw the dark circles deepening under her eyes. He saw the way her hands shook when she lifted the heavy iron skillet. For the first time, he truly understood the sheer physical cost of her existence. He lay there, trapped by his own broken bones, unable to reach a cup of water on the table 3 feet away without calling for her. He felt the humiliation of needing a bedpan, the helplessness of being unable to wash his own back. It was a bitter medicine, but he drank it. He realized that the frustration boiling in his gut, the feeling of being a burden, an object to be managed, was exactly what Claire lived with every day in a world built for walking people. One afternoon, Claire brought him a bowl of stew. As she leaned over to adjust his pillows, her arm brushed his face. He caught her wrist, his grip weak but earnest. "You are exhausted," he rasped. "Leave the dishes. Rest." "The dishes will not wash themselves." "Eli," she said, attempting a smile that did not reach her eyes. "I'm sorry," he said, the words heavy in the quiet room. "I laid here for months thinking I understood what it was like for you. I did not know half of it. I did not know how hard it is to have a mind that wants to run and a body that refuses to move." Claire sat back in her chair, the bowl resting in her lap. She looked at him, seeing the new depth of understanding in his fever-bright eyes. "It is not the inability to move that is the hardest part," she said softly. "It is the way people look at you while you are stuck. But you do not look at me that way anymore." "I look at you," Eli said. "And I wonder how I ever thought I was the strong one." "We are equal now," she whispered, broken parts and all. As summer deepened into August, Eli's strength began to return. He graduated from the bed to a pair of crude crutches he had whittled before the accident. He could hobble to the porch, sitting for hours with his leg propped up, watching Claire work in the small garden she had planted. News of the mudslide and the rescue had traveled down the mountain with the fur traders. Rumors swirled in Silver Creek. The story of the crippled woman who had dragged a mountain man out of a landslide grew with every telling. Some said she had supernatural strength. Others claimed it was impossible. Just another tall tale. But a quiet respect began to take root in the community, a grudging admiration for the woman up on the ridge. Then came the day the buggy arrived. It was a hot, dusty Tuesday. The air was thick with the scent of resin and dry grass. Eli was on the porch, mending a bridle, while Claire sat nearby, reading aloud from a newspaper Amos Higgins had sent up with the last supplies. The sound of wheels crunching on gravel drew their attention. It was not the heavy rattle of a freight wagon, but the light, rhythmic clip-clop of a carriage horse, a shiny black buggy, totally unsuited for the rough mountain track, pulled into the clearing. 2 men sat on the bench. One was Mr. Sterling, the marriage broker, looking dusty, nervous, and sweating profusely in his cheap suit. Beside him sat a man Eli did not know, a man wearing a tailored gray coat, a silk vest, and a bowler hat. He held the reins with gloved hands, looking at the cabin with a sneer of distaste. Claire went rigid. The book slid from her lap, hitting the floorboards with a thud. Her face drained of color, turning the shade of old parchment. "Thomas," she breathed. Eli looked at her, then at the stranger. The man, Thomas, handed the reins to Sterling and stepped down from the buggy. He avoided the mud puddles with fastidious care, brushing dust from his lapels before looking up at the porch. He was handsome in a soft, city way. He had the look of a man who had never chopped a piece of wood in his life. "Claire," Thomas said. His voice was smooth, cultured, and utterly cold. "You are difficult to find. What are you doing here?" Claire asked, her voice trembling. She gripped the armrests of her chair until her knuckles turned white. "I have come to collect you," Thomas said, walking to the foot of the steps. He glanced briefly at Eli, dismissing the injured man in rough clothes as a servant or a hired hand. "Your Aunt Matilda has passed. It seems she had a soft spot for you, despite your situation. She left you a considerable sum in her will." I do not want it, Claire said. Go away. Thomas sighed, as if dealing with a petulant child. It is not that simple. My dear, the will stipulates that the funds are to be administered by a guardian, provided you are unmarried or incapacitated, since you are clearly the latter, and your family is concerned for your well-being living in this hovel. I have been appointed to bring you home. She is home, Eli said. His voice was a low rumble, like thunder before a storm. He used his crutch to heave himself upright, standing on his good leg, towering over the railing. Thomas looked at Eli with amused surprise. And you are? I am her husband, Eli said. Eli Ward. Thomas laughed. It was a dry, sharp sound. Ah, yes, the mountain man, Mr. Sterling has told me all about the arrangement. A sordid business, but I'm afraid the marriage is not worth the paper it is scrawled on. Sterling scrambled out of the buggy, wiping his forehead with a handkerchief. He would not meet Eli's eyes. Mr. Ward, please understand, there were irregularities. What irregularities? Eli demanded, his hand drifting toward the skinning knife on his belt. Fraud, Thomas declared, stepping up the first step. Mr. Sterling failed to disclose the extent of Claire's injuries to you. Under the law, that constitutes a deception by omission. You were sold damaged goods under false pretenses. Therefore, the contract is voidable. We are here to avoid it. Claire felt a wave of nausea roll over her. They were discussing her like a lame horse. Damaged goods. Voidable. The old shame, the feeling of being nothing more than a broken object, clawed at her throat. She looked at Thomas, the man who had once promised to love her, the man who had walked away the moment she lost her legs, and felt herself shrinking. We are doing you a favor, Ward, Thomas continued, his tone becoming conspiratorial. You get your money back. Sterling has agreed to a full refund, and you are free of the burden. We take poor Claire to a sanitarium where she can be properly cared for, and I manage the estate. Everyone wins. A sanitarium? Claire whispered. You mean an asylum? You want to lock me away so you can spend Aunt Matilda's money? You are hysterical. Claire, Thomas said smoothly, this is exactly why you need a guardian. You are not fit to make decisions. Look at you, living in the dirt, playing house with a savage. Eli's knuckles turned white on his crutch, the rage that had been simmering in his gut since the train station exploded. But this time, it was not directed at fate or the broker. It was directed at the man standing on his steps. Get off my land, Eli growled. Now, be reasonable, Sterling squeaked from the yard. Mr. Ward, think of the difficulty. A woman like that, up here, it is unnatural. We are offering you a way out. I said get out, Eli roared. Thomas ignored him. He fixed his eyes on Claire. Come along, Claire. I have a wagon waiting in town. Do not make this difficult. You know you cannot survive here. You are half a woman trying to live a whole life. It is pathetic. Half a woman. The words hung in the hot air, buzzing like flies. Eli dropped his crutch. He ignored the pain in his broken leg. He hopped down the first step, grabbing the porch rail for support. You speak of her that way again, and I will bury you here. Eli, no! Claire shouted. She saw the violence in Eli's eyes, the way his muscles coiled. If he struck this man, this wealthy city man, the law would come down on him. He would hang or rot in a cell. She wheeled her chair forward, blocking Eli's path to the stairs. She turned her chair to face Thomas. She was sitting down, looking up at him. But suddenly, she did not look small. She looked formidable. You are wrong, Thomas, she said. Her voice was not shaking anymore. It was cold and hard as iron. I am not half a woman. I am twice the person you will ever be. Thomas sneered. Brave words from a cripple. I survived the accident that you ran from, Claire said, her voice rising, piercing the mountain air. I survived the surgeons. I survived the abandonment of my family. And I survived a winter on this mountain that would have killed you in a week. She pointed a finger at Sterling. You lied, Mr. Sterling. You lied to get your fee, but Eli knows. He knows everything, and he stayed. He did not stay because he was tricked. He stayed because he is a man of honor, something neither of you would understand. He stayed because he is stuck, Thomas shouted, losing his composure. Because he is too stubborn to admit he bought a lemon. He stayed because I saved his life, Claire yelled back. When the mountain tried to crush him, I pulled him out. I dragged him 3 miles through the mud while you were sitting in your club drinking brandy. I am his wife. I earned that title in blood and sweat, and I will not let you take it from me for an inheritance you want to steal. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the jays in the trees seemed to hold their breath. Thomas's face turned a mottled red. His plan, to bully a helpless cripple and a simple woodsman, was unraveling. He looked at Claire, sitting there with her chin high, and he hated her. He hated her for surviving. He hated her for exposing his cowardice. "You are coming with me," Thomas snarled. He lunged up the steps. "Do not touch her," Eli shouted, scrambling forward. Thomas grabbed the handle of Claire's wheelchair. "You belong to the family. Claire, you are property." He yanked the chair violently. Claire gasped as the wheels skidded. She grabbed the porch rail to keep from being thrown down the stairs. Eli threw himself at Thomas. He didn't have his crutch. He tackled the man with the weight of his body, driving his shoulder into Thomas's chest. They crashed onto the porch floor. Eli's broken leg screamed in protest, blinding him with white-hot pain. But he didn't let go. He punched Thomas in the jaw. A clumsy, desperate blow. Sterling shrieked, "Stop it! Stop it!" Thomas scrambled back, his nose bloody. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small, pearl-handled revolver. "Get back!" Thomas screamed. He waved the gun wildly. Eli froze, half rising. Claire screamed, "No!" Thomas fired. The crack of the pistol was deafening. The bullet went wide, shattering the window pane behind Claire's head. Glass rained down onto her shoulders. The violence of the sound snapped something in the air. The echo rolled down the valley. Thomas stared at the gun in his hand, shaking. He had never fired a weapon in anger. He looked at Eli, who was bleeding from his lip, and at Claire, who was covered in glass but staring at him with a look of pure, unadulterated loathing. "You tried to kill us," Claire said quietly. "You came to my home and you tried to kill my husband." It was self-defense," Thomas stammered, lowering the gun. "It was an assault," Eli said, his voice ragged with pain. He dragged himself up, leaning heavily on the rail. "And now it is a matter for the sheriff." "We are leaving," Sterling said, terrified. He grabbed Thomas's arm. "Mr. Wickham, we must go, now." "We are not done," Eli said. "You want the law? We will give you the law. We will see you in Silver Creek tomorrow at noon, and we will see what the town thinks of a man who shoots at a woman in a wheelchair." Thomas looked at the shattered window, then at the grim resolve on Eli's face. He holstered the gun, straightened his coat with trembling hands, and spat on the porch. "Tomorrow," Thomas hissed. "And bring a lawyer. Ward, you will need one." They retreated to the buggy and fled down the mountain, the wheels kicking up dust. Eli sagged against the wall, clutching his re-injured leg. Claire wheeled over to him, brushing the glass from her hair, her hands checking him for bullet holes. "Are you hit?" she demanded. "No," Eli gasped. "Just the leg. I think I twisted it." "We have to go to town," Claire said, her face grim. "If we do not face them, they will spin a lie. They will bring the sheriff up here to arrest you for assault." "I can't ride," Eli said. "Not like this." "Then we take the wagon," Claire said. "I will drive. We are going to finish this. Eli, once and for all." The next day, Silver Creek was buzzing. Sterling and Thomas had been buying drinks at the saloon, spreading their poison. They told anyone who would listen that Eli Ward was holding a helpless invalid hostage, that he had attacked her legal guardian, that he was after her inheritance. By noon, a crowd had gathered outside the sheriff's office. It was a spectacle. The rich city man in his fine suit, the nervous broker, and the dusty miners and shopkeepers waiting for the show. Sheriff Miller, a man with a handlebar mustache and tired eyes, stood on the boardwalk. "All right, settle down. I want to hear their side before I start locking people up." The sound of a wagon approached. The crowd parted. Claire drove. She sat on the bench, strapped in, her hands confident on the reins. Beside her, Eli lay on a pallet in the wagon bed, his face pale, his leg propped up. She pulled the team to a halt in front of the sheriff. The silence was heavy. Claire unbuckled her strap. She did not wait for help. She lowered herself from the seat to the wagon bed, then from the bed to her wheelchair, which Eli had tied to the back. It was a difficult, strenuous maneuver, but she performed it with a fluid, practiced grace. She settled herself, smoothed her skirts, and wheeled herself to the center of the street. She looked at Thomas, who stood smugly beside the sheriff. She looked at the crowd. "Sheriff Miller," Claire said, her voice clear and carrying. "I am Claire Ward. This man," she pointed at Thomas, "came to my home yesterday, assaulted my husband, and fired a weapon into my house. I wish to press charges." "She is lying," Thomas scoffed. "She is confused. Look at her, Sheriff. She is visibly unwell. I am her cousin and her legal guardian. I am here to take her home." "I have no guardian but myself," Claire said. "I am 29 years old and of sound mind." "The marriage is a fraud," Sterling piped up. "Ward did not know she was crippled. He was deceived." Sheriff Miller looked at Eli, who had dragged himself to a sitting position in the wagon. "Is that true? Eli, did you know?" Eli looked at the crowd. He saw the butcher who had laughed at him. He saw Amos Higgins. He saw the men who had mocked him in the saloon. "I did not know," Eli said. The crowd murmured. Thomas smirked. "I did not know," Eli continued, raising his voice, "until she came off that train. But that does not matter, because I know now." He pointed a shaking finger at Sterling. "That man lied to me. He took my money, but he accidentally gave me the best thing that ever happened to me." Eli looked at Claire. "You call her a cripple. You say she is broken. You listen to me. Last month, when the slide came down on the ridge, I was pinned. I was dying. My leg was crushed. This woman," his voice cracked, "this woman rode into a storm that scared the wolves away. She crawled through the mud. She pulled a pine tree off me with her own hands and a horse. She dragged me home." He glared at the miners. "How many of you have a wife who would do that? How many of you could do that?" The crowd shifted. Feet shuffled in the dirt. The men looked at Claire, sitting upright, proud, fierce, and the image of the helpless invalid dissolved. They saw the steel in her. "She saved my life," Eli said. "She runs my ranch. She teaches your children to read." He nodded at a woman in the crowd whose son Claire had tutored. "She is my wife, and she is staying." Thomas flushed. "This is sentimental rubbish. The law is clear. She is incompetent." "I have a statement," Claire announced. She pulled a folded paper from her sleeve. "I wrote it last night. It details the dates and amounts of money Mr. Sterling extorted from my family. It details the negligence of Mr. Wickham 3 years ago when he was driving the carriage that took my legs, a fact he has conveniently forgotten." She handed the paper to the sheriff. "And it details that I, Claire Ward, willingly entered this marriage and refused any guardianship from the family that discarded me." Sheriff Miller read the paper. He looked at Thomas Wickham. "You were driving the carriage?" Thomas paled. It was an accident. The road was slick. You left her," Eli accused from the wagon. "You ran away because you could not look at what you did." The crowd began to turn. The murmurs grew angry, directed now at the city man. "Coward!" someone shouted. "Snake!" hissed another. Sheriff Miller folded the paper. He looked at Sterling. "Mr. Sterling, if you want to avoid a jail cell for fraud, you will sign a statement right now admitting that the marriage is legal and binding, and that you received payment in full." Yes, of course," Sterling stammered, sensing the tide had turned. "Whatever you say." "Sheriff, and you," Miller turned to Thomas. "There is a train leaving in an hour. Be on it. If I see you in Silver Creek after sunset, I will arrest you for attempted murder regarding that gunshot." Thomas Wickham looked at the hostile faces surrounding him. He looked at Claire, who watched him with a cool, detached pity. He realized he had underestimated the mountain, and he had underestimated her. "You are making a mistake," Thomas spat at Claire. "You will rot up there." "Better to rot in freedom than live in a cage," Claire responded. Thomas turned and stormed off toward the station, Sterling scurrying after him like a rat. The street was silent for a moment. Then, slowly, the tension broke. Amos Higgins stepped forward and tipped his hat to Claire. "Mrs. Ward," he said respectfully. "Good to see you." "Thank you, Mr. Higgins," Claire said. Eli watched from the wagon. His heart was pounding in his chest, hurting more than his ribs. He looked at his wife, his defender, his partner. "Claire," he called out softly. She wheeled herself over to the wagon. She reached through the slats and took his hand. "I meant what I said," Eli told her, loud enough for the lingering crowd to hear. "I would not trade you, not for 100 women with perfect legs, not for anything in this world." Claire squeezed his hand, tears shining in her eyes. "Let's go home. Eli." The townspeople watched them go. They watched the mountain man and the woman in the wheelchair moving up the street, battered and bruised, but entirely, undeniably whole. And no one, not a single soul, laughed. The seasons turned, as they always did in the high country, with a slow, deliberate indifference to the dramas of men. The summer that had witnessed the violence on the porch faded into a crisp, golden autumn. The aspens ignited into torches of yellow flame against the dark spruce, and the air grew sharp with the promise of frost. For Eli and Claire Ward, the silence that returned to the mountain was different from the one that had existed before. It was no longer the heavy, suffocating silence of loneliness, nor the tense, fragile silence of two strangers sharing a room. It was a companionable peace, filled with the sounds of a life being lived rather than merely endured. The confrontation with Thomas Wickham and the broker had acted like a thunderstorm that broke a long heat wave. The air was clearer now. The town of Silver Creek, having witnessed the trial on the main street, had shifted its gaze. The whispers did not stop entirely. Human nature was too small for that, but the tone had changed. It was no longer malicious mockery. It was a curious, grudging respect. People began to venture up the trail. At first, it was just Amos Higgins, bringing the mail and a bag of peppermint sticks, his eyes darting around the cabin to see how the invalid was managing. Then came Mrs. Sarah Jenkins, a rancher's wife from the valley floor, who rode up with a basket of apples and a burning curiosity. Claire met them all on the porch. She did not hide in the back room. She sat in her chair, her hands busy with mending or shelling beans, and looked them in the eye. "Mrs. Ward," Sarah Jenkins said on that first visit, looking at the ramp Eli had built. "It is a long ride up here. I surely do not know how you manage without help." "I have help," Claire smiled, nodding toward the woodpile where Eli was splitting logs. "And for the rest, I have leverage. A wheel is just a leg that never gets tired." "Mrs. Jenkins," she invited the woman inside. She showed her the low shelves, the modified stove, and the pulley system for the water. She explained her methods not with shame, but with a frank, practical humor that disarmed the other woman completely. By the time Sarah left, she was asking for Claire's recipe for cornbread and promising to bring her knitting next time. But the greatest change came with the children. It started with the son of a trapper named Silas, a boy of 10 who had never learned his letters. Eli found him staring at the spine of Ivanhoe during a visit to trade pelts. "My wife can read that to you," Eli had grunted. "Better yet, she can teach you to read it yourself." Word spread. The mountain was full of families living on isolated claims, children growing up wild as the deer. With no schoolhouse within 20 miles, Claire, starving for the vocation she had lost, asked Eli to bring down his old books. Every Tuesday and Thursday, the cabin transformed. 5 or 6 children, ranging from 6 to 12 years old, would make the trek up the trail. They sat on the bearskin rug or on the low benches Eli had fashioned. Claire was in her element. She did not need to stand to command a room. She held them wrapped with stories of history and geography. She taught them to write their names on slate tablets Eli had bought in town. One afternoon, a new boy, the son of a miner, pointed at her blanket. "Where are your legs?" he asked bluntly. The room went silent. The other children looked terrified. Claire did not flinch. She wheeled her chair forward. "I lost them in an accident," she said calmly. "Just like your father might lose a finger in the mine if he is not careful. It means I cannot run races with you, but it also means I am the best person to referee, because I never get out of breath watching." The boy blinked, processed this, and nodded. "Can you teach me to write gunpowder?" "I can," Claire said, picking up her chalk. The parents who came to collect their children saw the change. They saw the patience Claire had, the light in her eyes. They stopped seeing a cripple and started seeing a teacher. They began to leave small gifts on the porch, a comb of honey, a fresh side of pork, a bag of wool, payment for the education their children were receiving, and a silent offering of apology for their past judgments. While Claire reclaimed her place in the world, Eli worked to reshape the world to fit her. He was a man possessed by a quiet, relentless energy. The fear of the winter and the memory of Claire crawling across the floor during the blizzard drove him. He built a sturdy handrail system that ran from the cabin to the privy, and another to the garden, allowing Claire to pull herself along even if the ground was slick. He expanded the garden, building raised beds that stood 3 feet high, encased in rough-hewn logs. This allowed Claire to weed and harvest without having to leave her chair or strain her back leaning over. But his masterpiece was the winter chair. He spent weeks in the shed, bending hickory wood with steam, shaping iron runners at his small forge. He built a sleigh chair, a high-backed seat mounted on wide, waxed runners with a heavy, low center of gravity so it would not tip. It had a harness attachment so he could pull it himself or hitch it to Buster for longer journeys. "So, we are not trapped," he told her when he presented it, the smell of linseed oil and fresh wood filling the room. "When the snow comes this year, we will go out together." Claire ran her hands over the smooth wood of the armrests. She looked at Eli, seeing the calluses on his hands, the gray in his beard, and the absolute devotion in his eyes. "You act like you are building a castle," she whispered. "I am building a life," Eli corrected her. That night, the air in the cabin was thick with a different kind of heat. They had bathed, a complex operation involving the large tin tub by the fire. Eli had hauled the water, heating it in batches. He lifted Claire in and out, his strength balancing her fragility. In the early days of their marriage, this act had been fraught with embarrassment. Now, it was a ritual of intimacy. Eli knelt beside the tub, washing her back with a rough cloth and a bar of lavender soap she had ordered from the city. The firelight danced on the water, casting moving shadows on the log walls. "The water feels good," Claire sighed, leaning her head back against the rim. "My hips ache when the cold sets in." "I know," Eli murmured. He dropped the cloth and used his soapy hands to massage the muscles of her lower back, his thumbs working out the knots with practiced skill. He moved to her legs, the scarred, truncated thighs that had once been the source of so much shame for her. He washed them with the same care he gave the rest of her, treating the scar tissue not as a horror, but as just another part of the woman he loved. When he lifted her out, wrapping her in a warmed sheet, the transition from caretaking to desire was seamless. He carried her to the bed, the one they now shared every night. They lay in the dark, the fire popping in the grate. Eli pulled her close, her back against his chest, his arm draped over her waist, his hand resting flat on her stomach. "You are good with the children," Eli said, his voice rumbling against her ear. "I love them," Claire admitted. "I miss them when they go down the mountain." "We could have one," Eli said. The words hung in the darkness, tentative and heavy. "Our own—" Claire stiffened slightly. They had danced around this topic for months. "Eli, the doctors in St. Louis. They said my body might not handle the strain, without legs to bear the weight, my hips, and the delivery. I know, Eli said quickly, tightening his hold. I know the risk, and I could not bear it if I lost you. I would burn this whole mountain down if it took you from me. But you want a son? Claire said, or a daughter. I see the way you look at Silas's boy. I want a family, Eli corrected. But you are my family. Claire, first and foremost, if that is all we ever are, 2 people in a cabin, that is enough for me. Claire turned in his arms, pressing her face into his neck, breathing in the scent of him. It is enough, she whispered, though a small, quiet ache remained in her heart. She wanted to give him everything. She wanted to fill this house with life. The answer came 2 weeks later, not from her body, but from the mountain itself. It was late November. The first heavy snows had not yet fallen, but the wind was bitter. Sheriff Miller rode up the trail, a small, bundled shape sitting in front of him on the saddle. Eli went out to meet him, rifle in the crook of his arm. Claire wheeled herself to the doorway. The sheriff climbed down, looking grim. He lifted the bundle down. A boy, no more than 6 years old, with hair the color of straw and eyes that looked like bruises in his pale face. He was wrapped in a coat that was 3 sizes too large. Eli, Mrs. Ward, the sheriff nodded. What happened? Eli asked, looking at the boy. Mining accident over at the Black Dog claim, Miller said, spitting tobacco into the dirt. Gas pocket, blew the drift. 3 men died. One of them was this boy's PA, Jacob Thorne. And the mother? Claire asked, her heart already twisting. Died of the fever 2 winters back. Miller said, Boy has got no kin. No one in town wants another mouth to feed with winter coming on. The orphanage in Denver is full, and I can't make the ride there until spring anyway. The boy stood shivering in the dirt. He did not cry. He did not speak. He stared at the ground as if he expected it to open up and swallow him, too. Eli looked at the boy, then at Claire. A silent communication passed between them, a conversation of eyebrows and slight nods that only married people understand. Bring him inside, Claire said. He is freezing. The boy's name was Toby. For the first 3 days, he was like a ghost. He sat where they put him, ate what they gave him, and slept curled in a tight ball on a pallet near the fire. He did not speak a single word. He was terrified of Eli, the sheer size of the mountain man, with his beard and his deep voice, seemed to overwhelm the child, but he was fascinated by Claire. On the 4th day, Claire was shelling dried corn into a bowl. Toby was sitting on the rug, watching her. It is a strange chair, isn't it? Claire said softly, not looking at him. Toby didn't answer. Most chairs stay put, Claire continued. Mine likes to wander. It makes me faster than my husband, though he hates to admit it. Toby blinked. He looked at the empty space beneath her skirt. I broke my legs a long time ago, Claire said, answering the question he was too scared to ask. So now I use wheels. It is a different way of moving, but I get where I am going. She held out a cob of corn. You have strong hands. Toby, I bet you could get the kernels off this faster than I can. Toby hesitated. Then, slowly, he reached out and took the corn. He began to pick at the kernels. My PA is dead, the boy whispered. It was the first sound he had made. Claire stopped her work. She wheeled herself closer and reached out, resting her hand on his small, dirty shoulder. I know, she said. And it hurts. It hurts like a heavy stone sitting on your chest. Toby looked up, his eyes filling with tears. My legs hurt like that too, sometimes. Claire lied gently, bridging the gap between his pain and hers. Even though they are gone, but the stone gets lighter. Toby, you have to carry it for a while. But one day, you will be able to set it down. Toby launched himself at her. He buried his face in her lap, sobbing. Claire wrapped her arms around him, rocking him back and forth, her own eyes wet. Eli, who had been standing just outside the door, listening, felt a lump in his throat the size of a fist. He walked away toward the woodpile, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. Toby was meant to be temporary. Just for the winter, the sheriff had said, but as the snows came down, sealing the cabin into its annual isolation, the boy wove himself into the fabric of their lives. He was traumatized, prone to nightmares that woke the house with screaming. On those nights, it was Eli who went to him. The big man would scoop the boy up, wrap him in a quilt, and sit with him in the rocking chair by the fire. "Look at the fire, Toby," Eli would rumble, his voice a low, soothing drone. "See how it eats the wood? Nothing can get you in here. The fire keeps the dark away. I keep the dark away." Eli taught the boy to whittle. He taught him how to check the trap lines, carrying Toby on his shoulders through the deep drifts when the boy's legs got tired. Claire took over his mind. She taught him to read, tracing letters in the condensation on the window pane. She taught him to cook, sitting him on a stool so he could reach the table. She was fiercely protective. When he fell and scraped his knee, she was there instantly, not coddling him, but teaching him how to clean it and bind it, making him feel capable rather than helpless. By February, the silence of the cabin was gone, replaced by the clatter of small boots and the sound of a child asking, "Why?" 100 times a day. One evening, Toby was sitting on the floor playing with a wooden horse Eli had carved him. "Eli?" Toby asked. "Yeah, son," Eli said, looking up from his ledger. "When the snow melts," Toby said, not looking up. "Do I have to go to the orphanage?" The room went still. Claire froze, her needle hovering over a sock. Eli looked at Claire. He saw the panic in her eyes, the same panic he felt in his own chest. The thought of this boy leaving, of the cabin going back to just 2, was unbearable. Eli put down his pen. "Come here, Toby." The boy stood up and walked to Eli's chair. Eli put his large hands on the boy's shoulders. "Do you want to go to the orphanage?" Eli asked. "No," Toby whispered. "I want to stay with you, and with Claire." "Then you stay," Eli said firmly. "You stay as long as you live." Toby looked at Claire. "For real?" "For real," Claire said, her voice thick. "We are a family now. Toby, you, me, and Eli. And families stick together." When the spring thaw came, they went to town. They rode in the wagon, Eli driving, Claire on the bench beside him, and Toby sitting between them. They went straight to the sheriff's office. "We are keeping him," Eli told Miller before the man could even say hello. Miller looked at the 3 of them. He saw the way the boy leaned against Eli's side. He saw the fierce, mother lion look in Claire's eyes. "Well," Miller smiled, pulling a paper from his drawer. "I figured you might say that. I have the papers drawn up right here. Just need signatures." They walked out of the office an hour later as legal parents. The townspeople watched them. They saw the mountain man, the woman in the wheelchair, and the orphan boy. A woman. The town gossip, who had once called Claire half a wife, stopped them on the boardwalk. "He looks well fed," the woman said, looking at Toby. "You are raising him up there, in that cabin?" "We are," Claire said pleasantly. "He is learning to read, write, and track a deer. He is happy." "It is a lot of work," the woman sniffed. "For someone in your condition." "My condition," Claire said, her hand resting on Toby's shoulder, "is that I am a mother, and mothers do the work. Good day, Mrs. Higgins." She wheeled herself down the boardwalk, Toby marching proudly beside her, and Eli bringing up the rear, a smile hidden in his beard. Late summer arrived, bathing the San Juans in a light so gold it felt like honey poured over the world. The evening was cool, carrying the first hint of the coming autumn. Toby had fallen asleep on the bearskin rug inside, exhausted after a day of fishing in the creek. Claire sat on the porch in her chair, a shawl wrapped around her shoulders. She was watching the sun dip behind the jagged peaks, setting the clouds on fire with violet and orange. The door opened, and Eli stepped out. He carried 2 mugs of coffee. He handed one to her and sat on the step beside her chair, leaning his back against the wheel. They sat in silence for a long time, watching the light fade. "We made it," Eli said quietly. Claire looked down at him. "We did." She thought back to the train station, the bitter cold, the shock on his face, the terror in her heart. She thought of the long, agonizing wagon ride, the humiliation of the stairs, the storms, the gunshots, the pain. It seemed like another life. The woman who had arrived on that train, trembling and ashamed, was gone. In her place was this woman, a wife who knew the weight of her husband's body, a teacher who opened minds, a mother who soothed nightmares, a survivor who had tamed a mountain. "I used to worry," Claire said softly, "that you would always see the chair first, that I would always be the woman in the wheelchair to you." Eli reached up and took her hand, interlacing their fingers. "I do not see the chair, Claire." "I never really did, not after that first night. I just see you. I still can't walk." "Eli," she said, "that hasn't changed." "No," Eli agreed, "but you have carried me further than my own 2 legs ever did." He turned and looked up at her. The dying light caught the gray in his beard and the lines around his eyes, lines that were from smiling now, not just squinting against the sun. "You are the bravest person I know," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I ordered a bride because I was tired of the silence. I thought I was buying a housekeeper. I didn't know I was finding the part of me I didn't know was missing." Claire felt the tears prick her eyes, but they were happy tears. "And I thought I was running away to die in a place where no one knew me. Instead, I found a life." The conversation turned soft, the words drifting into the twilight. Eli shifted, rising to his knees beside her chair. He took her face in his rough, warm hands. He looked at her with a hunger that had not dimmed with time, but had deepened, rooted in the soil of their shared struggles. He kissed her. It was a kiss of profound gratitude and fierce desire. It was a kiss that acknowledged every scar, every limitation, and dismissed them as irrelevant compared to the love that bound them. Claire leaned into him, her hands tangling in his hair. She felt the strength of his shoulders, the beat of his heart. She felt the wholeness of herself. The sun slipped below the horizon, leaving the sky a deep, bruised indigo. Inside the cabin, the fire crackled, keeping the boy warm. Outside, the vast, indifferent mountains stood watch, ancient and cold, but on the porch, framed by the wildness of the west, a small circle of warmth glowed against the dark. Claire sat at the center, her husband's hand on her shoulder, her child asleep within reach, her home solid beneath her wheels. They had fought the world, the weather, and their own fears to be here. And as the stars began to wheel overhead, bright and sharp as diamonds, Claire knew that they had won. They had dared to desire, fiercely and without apology. And in the harsh, unforgiving country, they had built a love that was the strongest thing on the mountain. Thank you for listening to this story. It has been a journey from the cold winds of the train station to the warm glow of the cabin porch. If you enjoyed the story of Eli and Claire, please take a moment to subscribe to From Wild West. We would love to hear from you. Please leave a comment below telling us where you are listening from and what you thought of their journey. Did their story resonate with you? Share your thoughts in English in the comments section. We appreciate you being part of our community.